This episode is brought to you by Elevate OS, the only all-in-one community operating system. Elevate OS transforms property management, combining resident engagement, reservations, rent payments, maintenance, and concierge services into a single super app. It also uniquely integrates access control, intercoms, package lockers, and thermostats, eliminating app fatigue and redefining modern apartment living. Visit elevateos.com/MMN for a free demo and see how they can help you level up your operations. Welcome to another episode of the Multifamily Collective. I have an exciting episode coming to you this week. It is that time of the week again, and I'm on this kick with Humbler, Proud Mary Coffee Roasters based in Portland, and that's important today because Nicholas Cook has a company in Portland called Sleep Sound Property Management. And I had the opportunity to spend 40 to 50 minutes with him unpacking his philosophies about real estate, his philosophy about operations, his philosophies just about life in general, how to show up in the world in a way that is energetic, in presence for other people. And it was just a thrilling conversation. So grab your favorite beverage. For me, again, it's the Humbler Roast from Proud Mary Coffee Roasters there in Portland, Oregon, and grab your favorite writing utensil and grab your favorite notebook because there are a lot of notes that you need to take here. We went through a lot of different things like early inning mistakes that Nicholas made in purchasing properties and operating properties, some of the things behind systems that are necessary to make property management work for the real estate that you buy, pitfalls that he ran into, opportunities that he sees. We talked a little bit about policy and regulation. He operates in Portland, Oregon, which has become a bit challenging in terms of housing and single-family home rentals and multifamily rentals, housing in general. We unpack a little bit of that, or he unpacks a little bit of that. I just asked a few teasing questions and happen to share his views, but that's an interesting topic that we get into. And then just some rapid fire questions about him personally, some of the things that he likes and loves. And it's just an interesting conversation I think you will really enjoy. So grab your coffee, grab your pen, grab your notebook, and enjoy this conversation with Nicholas Cook. Nicholas, welcome to the show.
Yeah, great to be here, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this episode because I used to live in Portland. I think it was there like 9 years plus minus. It's one of my favorite cities, or at least my recollection. I've been gone for some bit of time now, but
Sure.
I know that's where you live today.
I do. Actually, I've lived here my whole life, believe it or not.
Right on. That's what area of the city do you actually live in?
These days I live in Southwest Portland, but I grew up on the east side. I grew up in Mount Tabor, lived on the east side until, probably about 6 years ago, and then finally started moving west. And right now, for this stage of my life, it's just kind of a better spot to be, but still technically in Portland. So
Love it. Yeah. My wife and I built a house many years ago in Welch's. I think it's like 25 minutes from government camp.
Sure.
It's up that way. So
that's cool. Yeah, I've been up there before for sure.
Beautiful, beautiful area of the country. Well, I want to start out in maybe an unorthodox way. And you had a run-in with local police early on in your professional career. And I wonder if you'd unpack that story for us.
Yeah, that was a wild situation. And, it kind of just goes to show that sometimes people should do their homework. And in this case, I had done my homework. And what happened was, I was young, new into real estate. I was flipping houses kind of during the heyday. This is 2005, 2006. And I was using option contracts to tie up property, right? And when you have an option contract, you have something called equitable title. So technically you have an interest and you're allowed to market that interest. Long story short, there was a realtor who didn't know what that was. And rather than, ask me about what, was going on, how I, was able to list the property as a principal and so forth, she just basically reported me to the white collar crime division of the Portland police. And they arranged what they thought was going to be a little sting operation and basically posed as buyers. I show up and they're like, you're not allowed to do this. Like, this is illegal. This is fraud, blah, blah, blah. And I was just, first of all, obviously completely shocked. I was really young at the time, but I knew that what I was doing was right because I'd already had, attorneys look at what we were doing. And I had some mentors that were older that had been doing something similar and, basically showed me the ropes on that. but still, nonetheless, I mean, that's super shocking. And they're like, you got to tear up this option contract, and I had to basically just walk them over to my car and pull out my laptop and power it up and show that, like, hey, I actually, this is a valid agreement. I had it recorded, at the county, office, and obviously, things are slow, so they hadn't even seen that to see that I actually had a legitimate, cloud on the title. And it basically just devolved from there. They obviously realized that what they were doing was incorrect and that I was in the right, but they didn't want to, I don't know if it was like, lose face or whatever. So they started turning the argument from, their legal argument, or accuse me of a crime, essentially, into, a moral argument of like, well, you're not paying enough for this property, and da 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 da. And
Oh,
it's just like, you guys don't know the background of this. I've met with this person multiple times. They thought about it with their family for a week. They decided this made the most sense. For everyone, money's not always the most important thing. Sometimes flexibility, sometimes speed is
that's
important. We do that all the time. Like, people sell, items at secondhand stores that they paid, a lot of money for, and they sell it for $5. So, value is something that, is basically dynamic. And they didn't realize that. And it just turned into this whole other thing. And then they tried to report me to the real estate agency and all this other stuff. And long story short, I ended up coming out unscathed in many ways. But one of the things that also came from that was I ended up on the local news because this detective reported me to the news, and they showed up at my house, and unexpected, right? And so again, just another shocker. And they released the K2 on your side kind of thing.
sure.
And half the things about my MySpace page at the time, like, obviously this is a long time ago because people don't really use MySpace anymore.
Yeah,
There's
that's
just like pictures of me, and like I was like, what is going on here? And so, again, it's just one of those things. It was sensational, and but it taught me some valuable lessons early on. And so, I took a while to share that story. Obviously, my immediate friends knew about it, and my family did when it happened. But there's a couple of years where I was still in shock. I'm like, I cannot believe this happened. So, anyways, wild entry into real estate, and I was just glad that I kept my composure and didn't let them essentially try to convince me that what I was doing was not legal when it was, and me and the seller and everyone was happy with the situation except them. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
No, I appreciate you unpacking that for us. When doing my research, I was like, that's a great lead in. I imagine
Yeah.
there's some great lessons in that. And so as a segue, so you're 18, 19, 20 years old, you're out flipping homes, you're getting introduced to the real estate space, you're taking on an ownership role. At some point, I guess I have two sort of aha moment questions. One is the
Hmm.
aha real estate and flipping homes is pretty interesting. So let's go do that. And then secondly, you opened a property management company called Sleep Sound Property Management at some point. So
Yeah.
aha, it's fun to get in. Aha, I need a property management company. Can you tell us those two moments?
Yeah. Well, I got into real estate because probably like a lot of people. So I read Rich Dad Poor Dad when I was pretty young, and
Great book.
I was like, yeah, great book, and it's enough to kind of give you a new perspective. And I didn't have a perspective because I was so young, so I just thought that was kind of normal. And I ended up meeting a guy that owned a coffee shop who actually owned that as like a hobby and invested in real estate, and he made some recommendations on some books, and basically gave me his phone number so I could call him. And then, I basically jumped in with both feet and started going to some, seminars, and then just hit the ground running and giving it a shot. And, at the time, this was, when businesses, banks were giving loans to anybody, right? And I remember I opened like my first business credit card ever. We had no income yet, and they gave us a $25,000 credit limit, right? And it's just like, what in the world? So we basically use that to fund the first flip. And I say we because when I first started, the first year and a half, I had a business partner that was exactly my age. We grew up together. We have identical birthdays, and we kind of jumped into it together. We did find out that we were, better friends than business partners.
Oh,
And so, a year and a half in, it's like, all right, we got to kind of, do our own thing. But, it was a great way to start. And, I just loved it. Just kind of blew my mind of what was possible during that time. Now, during that time, I picked up a couple rental properties, and I just remember hearing people say, like they do today still, you're talking poorly about property managers and they can't find a good one. And I was studying real estate finance at PSU at the time, in their program. And, I thought about, okay, well, what can I do next? And I was like, oh, I want to start like a real estate fund. Well, what I didn't really realize is like I didn't really have any management experience at all, right? So
Yeah.
that was a great dream, but unlike flipping a house where it's kind of like one and done and you can kind of wing it, putting together an actual fund and people trusting you, I mean, that's just a different ball game. And so I was like,
Sure.
okay, well, I'll just start a property management company. And then basically within, a couple of months of doing that, 2008 hit and, everything just started falling apart. And I was like, well, I guess this is where I should be for now. And so I just basically started building that brick by brick. It was a lot harder than I thought it would be, both in the skills I didn't have and just in the business operations. I mean, it was so radically different than flipping houses. I thought I would be able to carry over 70% of my skill set and ended up being like 10% of my skill set. And it's just completely different animal. So,
Talk to us about that in terms of building a property management company brick by brick. Like maybe from a high level, what were some of the things you stubbed your toe on, or even broke some bones
yeah.
over?
It's not a place for a lot of creativity. Like in real estate, there's sometimes places where you can, put together deals and be creative and things like that. Property management is one not like that. It's like, these are the rules. Do not deviate from the rules. We know new technology exists. We know there's new ways to do business. Do not do that. They they really don't, because everything kind of ties back to just fair housing and different things like that. And so it becomes complicated there. It's also really really small margin business, right? And
That's right.
so that's a very difficult way to grow a business when you don't start off with any units, right? And so, I didn't know that. I never worked at a property management company. I didn't know what the profit margins were like or really anything. And so I just was kind of going out there thinking I could, you know, fly by the seat of my pants like I did with flipping houses, which, did go well for a handful of years. But this was just so different. And then you get into the hiring phase, hiring people for property management, retaining people for property management. It's hard, right? It's not an easy business. It's a very thankless business in a lot of ways. And with regulations increasing, the skill set and quality of people at your company have to be higher and higher, but margins are, again, low, and in some cases lower and lower. And so those were some things I just really didn't understand, like how to do properly. And then I was also very young. So I was competing against people who, had 20 years of experience. They looked the part when they walked in. They had a head full of gray hair, and I'm, walking in there, and they're like, "How old are you?" And how many properties do you manage? And those kind of things. And so it took some time to overcome. But after banging that drum for long enough, we've built a really great business, and have a great reputation in our city, and manage multifamily lease ups, multifamily properties in general, and then also residential single family as well. So.
One of the things I read about, we can classify it as a mistake or just maybe a education or learning opportunity, was feeling to let's call it fire fast. So in terms of somebody that was a poor culture fit, can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different things that kind of happen when you're operating a business, and one of the things is obviously like having core values in your business. That's an
Yeah.
important thing to do, and a lot of times people don't take the time to really build those out properly, probably because they don't either know truly what the true core values of the business are yet, or they don't understand why they're important.
Okay.
But the other thing too that I learned, in business, is a lot of times I would project my belief system or work ethic onto other people and make a lot of assumptions about how they might behave or respond in a certain situation. And so what I would try to do is, I always wanted to be really fair. I always wanted to be like, look, if this person's, not going to work here because it's not working out, like I want to make sure I tried everything I possibly can.
Mhm.
And so I gave people a lot of times more space to fail than probably was fair to them or to myself, right? Because I saw the writing on the wall. I knew something didn't feel right. It was evident. And just, I'd kind of tell myself some stories about, oh no, they're going to turn the ship around, or I really believe in them. And then they just wouldn't show up in the way that they needed to. And over time you learn, okay, well, when I see these types of behaviors or these types of things, I'm going to flag them immediately. And if they don't, get corrected, then we're going to make a change. And it's like dating, right? Like you might,
A little
the
bit. Yep.
first date, you might have blind spot, and but over time you kind of learn a little bit more about who you're looking for to partner with. And business is very much similar to that. Obviously, there are some obvious differences, but learning that was important. And I had to learn that through trial and error, but also through peers, right? So I have friends that own other businesses, also people who are in my industry, and being able to build those relationships and talk to them and be like, am I crazy? Like, is this, something that I should allow? And people be like, no, absolutely no. And so you're like, oh, okay. So it's a combination of, experience shares from other people, advice from other people, and then just learning your own way. And now I feel like, we've really built up some great tools, one on the front end, but also during to address things. And then you run into situations too where, you know, you might be trapped, right? During 2020 and 2021, a lot of businesses were struggling to hire. So you had to kind of make decisions about, the stability of the business versus, is this person doing, a good job? And at some point you have to make a call, and it might be painful, and deal with it. But in any case, yeah, I mean, that was something that I had to learn the hard way. And I think it's a really, really important thing. So if you've got somebody, on your team and you've had to think about them more than a couple times in terms of like, is this person a right fit? I'm worried about like, if they're not doing what they're supposed to, you're probably on the right track, and you should trust your instincts and start, taking whatever steps are necessary to make a decision.
Very good point. Very good point. Um, you alluded to, uh, I think it was in the lead in, good property management and bad property management. I'm paraphrasing, but
Mhm.
talk to us about what you believe separates good from a company that might have opportunity to get better.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, there's a lot of different things, but I think that at the end of the day, for a lot of people, property management looks like a commodity, right? Because
Mm,
everyone's collecting rent, everyone's responding to maintenance requests, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the things that really separate companies are going to be, one is um, you know the policies and procedures they have and how they're designed, because that will tell you how much thought they've put into operations and how many things they're anticipating, right? Property management is all about anticipating risk. What could
yeah.
go wrong, and what are we doing in advance to deal with it? So that's going to be a really important thing. So that helps us, would help me understand some of the intelligence of the people operating the business. I would obviously look at reviews and reputation, and I would want to read reviews about somebody, really failing consistently to do what we would consider normal services, right? Obviously, people are going to be upset if you take part of their security deposit because they didn't, do what they're supposed to, or deny an application. There are going to be things like that. But there are other things where, if you're talking about just like etiquette, them being rude, or they're not being responsive, or heavily neglecting maintenance issues, like those kind of things would be things that I would be worried about. So reputation, in addition to the systems, would be things that I would be, primarily concerned about. I would also, want to see how engaged they are in the industry, because if it's a company that like, they're not ever writing content, they're not going to conferences, they're not participating in the greater ecosystem, that would tell me that they're not really focused on constant improvement, best practices, things like that. So I would want to see that these people are like bought in to the industry and not just kind of siloed off in some way. And then accountability, which is something that, you build through reputation, but also through working with people, which is, look, property management has a lot of moving parts. Sometimes things are going to go wrong, but when they do, like, are they accountable, right? Did they
Mm,
take ownership of the mistake? And not only just acknowledge it, but if there's a financial cost and it's something that they did, then they should, make that right? If you messed up a lease renewal and now the owner's not getting as much money, then you have to fix that. You have to write a check for that. So there's a lot of different things we could talk about when it comes to property management, unpacking them. But I would say that the operational side is going to be important. And a lot of times owners see operations as almost like an obstacle, because they're like, well, why is this way? And it's like, well, it has to be this way so that we can do, check all the T's and dot the I's, so that we don't cause this larger problem down the line. And I've just seen a lot of other management companies, not everyone's like this, but they don't have those processes because it's not their risk in their mind.
right.
And so they're just like, we're going to do what's easy because everyone's happy with what's easy. And when it blows up, we're going to turn to our agreement that says, we're not responsible at all. And while it's important for them to have a good agreement, again, like if I were to hire a management company and they sent me a 2-page property management agreement, I would just assume that they don't know what they're doing,
Right.
because, why would you make your company potentially insolvent over one lawsuit, if something goes bad? Like, that just makes sense. But again, it goes back to like, are they accountable? What's their reputation like? And are they cutting corners? Because sometimes people try to say, well, we only need to walk the units once a year, and it's like, okay, well, why don't you do it twice a year? Because the problems that can materialize in that period of time, especially if you're in a tenant friendly state like I am, you need to be on top of things, and you need to protect the asset. So we could dive into this in a lot of different directions, but that's kind of high level.
Yeah, definitely. I think the way I'd like to dive into this is you've been doing this for some bit of time because you mentioned MySpace. that was a
Yeah,
long time.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so and you live in Portland, which has certainly transformed over the last, say, 20 years plus minus.
Hmm.
And so you had a mindset coming into this. In the beginning, it was flipping homes, but then you built a business around that. And
Hmm.
your mindset was whatever it was at that point in time. You have a different
Sure.
mindset today. I'm wondering sort of what's evolved as it relates to real estate purchasing, operations, investment, etc., in the city proper, or even if you want to speak more broadly, you can.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that there's a couple things that I've evolved on, and I think one of them is that I always thought that I'd be able to build a business in Portland, and that would be all that we would need in terms of a market and in terms of where we wanted to own property, and basically where we wanted to create opportunities for people. And over time, that's kind of evolved to, okay, we've got a good reputation here, we've got a good segment of the market. We're going to continue to operate in Portland, but we're also going to look outside of our market, and we're going to go, unfortunately, to other states, probably in the Midwest, maybe some parts of the South, but
Mhm.
we're pretty much done, or at least not going to do any sort of like development or purchases um, on the West Coast. And that kind of leads into mainly just the issue of, I mean, some of it is obviously the economics, right? You can get
Sure.
your money goes further in other markets, but it really comes down to the regulatory environment and the ideology of the environment here. I was really, really active in essentially trying to participate in the legislative process, and by submitting testimony to the Oregon legislature, by submitting testimony to the Oregon or Portland City Council. I even got appointed as a commissioner of the Portland Rental Services Commission when they first launched that, and ended up resigning because I realized that they weren't actually there to solve problems. They were just there to kind of rubber stamp or ask us to rubber stamp ideas that really had nothing to do with practical solutions. And a lot of people on the commission had never managed one property in their life. So, but basically, what I found is that early on it used to be about like what we need to do is we need to make sure we're educating the people in charge about housing and why it's important and why these things don't make sense. And that was kind of the goal. Well, it became clear that it really wasn't an education issue. Sometimes maybe, but most of the time we have a governing body at local and state levels that they don't actually care about what reality is or what essentially education we can provide. They want a certain practice or policy at all costs. And some of them are less blatant about that, but some of them are. I mean, some of them at least do the courtesy of saying, I want to drive investors out of Portland. I don't want them here. I'm going to implement policies to do that. And it's like, okay, well, at least you're transparent about what your aim is. But the problem is now what they've done over the last 15 years is really pretty much destroyed, major parts of the housing market, both on the single family side and on the multifamily side. You've seen construction fall off a cliff. And for a while, they tried to blame, well, when we change these permitting rules, we got a rush of permits. And so now there's like, basically a lull. And then they tried to blame COVID and blah, blah, blah. And now it's just completely apparent through the data. It's like people don't want to build here. And then you've got ULI, Urban Land Institute, rating us, 83rd out of 84th or whatever it is of cities to invest in. And it's not the first time they've done that. And so we just have a lot of problems. So I guess to circle back is we are looking beyond our market, especially as we get into the syndication side, to find opportunities. And it's unfortunate because this is really a place that does need development, right? It needs more housing, it needs quality housing, and you need people who want to own housing here, both small and big landlords, just to create a wide pool of selection for tenants. But that's everything that you would do if you wanted to write a book on how to do the opposite. That's what we're doing. So
Yeah, it's it's interesting to me. I worked for a big national firm when I lived in Portland in the early 2000s, mid 2000s. And at some point, they made a decision to exit that market. I imagine at the time it was probably based on economics, but they were big enough and well researched enough to probably see 5 years down the
Mm-hmm.
road where some of this
Mm-hmm.
stuff was leading. Not that they had a crystal ball that told them the answers, but they at least understood that. And so you've seen many of those people exit that market. And to your point, it's very unfortunate in that it has a much deeper and broader impact than people give it credit for when they put policies in place that are anti-housing.
Yeah, I mean, they are anti-housing, and the thing that's ironic is that the people that it hurts the most are the people that they're, purporting to want to protect, right?
Right.
Because
Right.
people who, don't have a lot of resources or have complicated lives, um, they need flexibility, they need variety.
Hmm.
The people who have A+ credit and good incomes, like they're going to get housing wherever they are. It doesn't matter. So
Yeah.
they're really destroying the base of people who would be willing to, basically cater to that market segment that actually needs something more affordable, that needs, some flexibility. But again, it goes back to this ideology, and it's like a lot of people's positions. They don't usually understand their position deeper than a few sentences. Like if you really try to drill into like conversations, because I've tried that, and then I just kind of realized like, oh, we're not having a conversation with somebody who has deep understanding of this market. They're just, again, getting on the bandwagon of what sounds good, right? And
Right.
then moving forward, not knowing the impact.
Definitely. That is so true. So let's sort of key off that a little bit in thinking about you're thinking about opportunities outside of that market
Mm-hmm.
because of some, let's call it, pitfalls that have been put in place. But if you were a new investor or
Mm-hmm.
somebody that's new to this space, what are some of the basic tenets that you've learned through reading books, but also through some real reps over the last 20 years? Some basic tenets that you put in place to have people consider before they make a run at this outside of Portland or even in Portland,
Yeah.
if that's possible.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that like it kind of depends on what your goals are, right? So I think the first thing that people need to do is figure out like what do they want to accomplish? And I know that sounds really basic, but a lot of times people kind of gravitate towards what they see on TV or what they think might be, more fun. But you really have to decide like, is my goal to make like a chunk of money in a short period of time? Do I want cash flow? Do I need tax benefits, et cetera, et cetera? So I think that's really, really important. So identifying like why you're trying to do this. The other component is, regardless, you need to understand the laws of where you're operating because the penalties are really significant if you mess them up. And so this is not something that you want to like do it yourself. Um, Especially if you're starting out, you need to find yourself a really great rental agreement or sales agreement, purchase and sale agreement that you can use. And if you need to go to an attorney to have one drafted, then go ahead and do that. But your paperwork is going to be one of the most important things. Um, the other thing too is, you don't want to overthink something. It's important to have some understanding of deal analysis. And when you're starting out, you really should try to find somebody who can give you another set of eyes, who has experience to look at what you're kind of underwriting, because they're going to probably spot things that you don't. But a lot of times people they read books and they talk about deals and they look at deals and look at deals and they never pull the trigger. And it's like, no one's going to die if you buy this property, right?
Sure.
Like
Sure.
you're going to figure it out, give yourself some cushion and understand that, it's not going to go as maybe planned, but you're going to learn a lot. And that's going to be something that's going to be invaluable. And I think the other thing kind of ties into that is do not get emotionally wrapped up in real estate, right? That is just something that whether you're, improving a property and flipping it and going overboard with the finishes, or if you're taking things that, the tenant's doing to the property personally, you just cannot look at it. You have to look at it as like, this is a business and these are customers, or, this is, how I need to operate it for it to be profitable. But some people just don't handle emotional,
Sure.
um, stress very well. And if you want to own rentals and you don't do that well, then you need to, um, you need to hire somebody like a property manager to do that for you, because
Yeah.
just otherwise you'll just, create problems that you shouldn't have, and then it can devolve. And on the rental side, the one thing I'll add is that if you have a rental agreement, it is very, very important that you enforce that agreement. If you think you're being nice by saying, oh, okay, well, I'm not going to charge this late fee even though you paid late, or okay, you have these pets even though you weren't supposed to, like, fine, I'll just let it happen. That is not the way to operate a business, and it's going to blow up in your face. And it's not going to be the first time that that person is going to disregard the agreement. And little do you know, you may be giving up rights under that agreement if you do that. That's a really big problem that I've seen people do. And so those are some things that I would recommend if you're wanting to get into real estate, is understand, what are your goals? Why are you trying to do it? Understand what your personal temperament is. Make sure you establish relationships with people who've done it that you can confer to, especially when you're underwriting a deal, and then just pull the trigger, like get out there and do it. You're never you can read about driving a car all you want, but until you do it, you're not going to have that experience. So very similar.
That's right. You have to do the reps to build the muscles of anything. So
yeah,
it makes me think. So I'm sitting and I'm listening to you and I'm taking notes. You started a podcast recently. I didn't get too deep into the podcast. It may not be recently. You started a
Sure.
podcast.
Yeah.
Was the premise for the podcast to pass along education? Because you sound like an incredible teacher in the way that you unpack information.
Well, yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, basically started the podcast, Retire on Rentals, earlier this year. I'd had one previously with a friend, and then it kind of fizzled during COVID because just life went off the rails there for a bit. But, the reason that this podcast exists, Retire on Rentals, is first and foremost is education, like you mentioned. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of clients that we want to make sure that we're adding value to at all times. And podcast is a great way to add value, not only to our clients, but to people who are interested in the real estate sphere. And I'm a big believer that real estate is a team sport. And I'm a big believer that in order to have a healthy real estate market, people need to be conducting themselves in a professional way and in a competent way. And so the more people out there who are doing a good job, they're going to build up the reputation of the industry. Whether it's a mom and pop, self-managing, or somebody flipping a house, or somebody, working in commercial real estate, it's all a benefit for the industry. So education is really important. The second reason that we do this is because, we are moving on the syndication side of things to, expanding what we're doing. We've done some, but not as much. And now we're kind of moving in that direction because I think there's more opportunity out there than there has been in a long time. Mm-hmm. And so, maybe there's somebody who wants to invest in real estate but doesn't have, basically the time or expertise, and they just need somebody who can essentially champion projects for them. And so, we're looking to connect with those people. And the third reason is more of a selfish reason. I just like talking to people about real estate, and I like an excuse to speak to them, an excuse to, in some cases, meet them. A lot of times the guests I already know, but sometimes I don't, and so it's great to kind of have an excuse to get to know that person and build a relationship.
I love that. I think podcasting it's interesting. You create all this content and you put it out into the world, and I'll speak selfishly for a second. The thing that podcasting has given me over the course of, I guess, 8 or 9 years that I've been doing this, 7 or 8 years, something like that, is a world-class education from, guys like yourself and others. It's like, whether anyone listens or not, and I want them to, and they do, but it's like the real benefit is what it gives back to you as an individual, mm-hmm. and all the people that you meet and the stories that you hear.
Yeah, that's great.
Definitely. I'm interested in you. This is my imagination, so if this is not true, you can certainly debunk it. But yeah. A guy like yourself is very busy, and I don't mean busy for the sake of being busy, but you're busy out in the community. You're busy in your business. You're busy thinking about what your business is going to be 3 to 5 years from now. So how do you balance everything that you do to sort of build the business and think about the business in the future and say life outside of work?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. And I think that, for a long time, I probably didn't know how to balance. So I think it took some time to figure that out, right? Because it's just like, if you're not working on the business, it's like, there's sometimes you feel guilty, like, well, I could be doing more, right? Mm-hmm. Especially at times where you're, maybe not at a place in the business where you want to be, or something's going awry, you're kind of like, I need to get this done. But what I've found is that that's a good way to get burnout, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
burnout is bad for everybody. It's bad for you, especially, but it's bad for everyone around you, whether it's your family or your team members or your friends. It just has a cascading effect of problems. And, I
Sure.
used to kind of, I guess, maybe be proud that I was like, oh, well, I don't really take that much time off ever, blah, blah. And, what I've learned is that, taking time off is actually, and people have been saying this for a long time, but is actually a net benefit, right? So the things that I do, I think there's a couple things. One is I exercise regularly, right? I do that in the morning, and that helps just manage stress. It really
Sure.
does. Kicks off the day right. And then I noticed if I like don't go to the gym for 3 or 4 days in a row for some reason, I notice a really large impact on my own, like just personality and energy and stress. The other thing too is I actually do a really good job making sure I get enough sleep. I really do.
Yeah.
I used to kind of not be as disciplined about that, but now it's like I'm going to do that. I have to make sure that I do that. I don't need a crazy amount of sleep. Once I hit like 7 hours, I'm pretty much good. But
Sure.
it's one of those things that I really focus on. Um, and then the other thing too is just learning to say no, right? Because there's a lot of things opportunities that come up that are distracting and seem exciting, or people to hang out with, or whatever it is, and just learning to kind of say no. And I think as of late, the last few years, so I actually about a month ago I got engaged, so I have a fiance now, and so
Congratulations.
thank you. And so being able to kind of like for us to make a lot of decisions together about like, okay, this is how we're going to be spending our time, and we both value maintaining relationships with our friends and stuff like that. So we, always try to be like, okay, like here are things that we're doing. Okay, winter times you're going to go do this with your friends, and vice versa. So I get a lot of value from spending time with people I know, even if it's just really not productive time. It's just hanging there, having a drink, whatever, talking. So I try to make time for that too. And so, um, but I think at the end of the day, it just comes down to making sure I get enough sleep and working out in the morning. Because if I work out in the morning, it forces me to go to bed at a reasonable time. It also forces me to make better evening decisions. So it's like, well, maybe I don't need to have another glass of wine with dinner, right? Like
Yeah.
that doesn't need to be part of it, because tomorrow I'm going to regret it. But I think those are kind of two things that I kind of bookend my days with, and I think that helps a lot. But I don't watch TV. Like maybe like once in a
Mm,
blue moon. I'm just not something that I'm into. If there's a sporting event on, like maybe like on Saturday, I'll watch like a college football game with friends. But otherwise, I don't really watch sports. I will go to a live event. But I just decided like those things they're not that important to me. And if they're important to somebody else, that's great. That can be your area of how you recharge. But I would rather go like on a hike, or I'd rather, um, read a book, or just go socialize with a friend or something like that. Those are the things that I kind of how I get, excited and recharged and so forth. But yeah, I'm still trying to figure out how to, really perfectly balance things. But I feel like right now, the last few years, I've been more balanced than I've ever been.
definitely. Well, as we draw to a close here, if you're up to it, I'd like to ask you a couple of rapid fire questions, and they really are
Yeah,
predicated on a couple of things that you just said.
sure. Yeah.
So you mentioned read a good book. Is there a book that really changed you, or is there a book that you hand out on a regular basis to people?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on what you're trying to accomplish or address. At our company, like, we're really big believers in traction, right? The book Traction.
Mm-hmm.
So we have all of our new hires read, what the heck is EOS? That's a required reading. Um, other books that we ask people to read and try to, get them to adopt is Never Split the Difference, because of the type
Mm,
of business we're in. It's an
yep.
excellent book for like framing, like how to deal with conflict.
Yep.
Basically crucial accountability is another one, because accountability is something that's really important to us. So those are some other books that we have people read. Um, there's a lot of books that I'm, a huge fan of. And I think at different stages in life, they bring different levels of value. Like I think there's always the classic Think and Grow Rich. Like I feel like if you're new to this space, that's just something you've got to
Yeah.
read.
Yeah.
And so I think it depends on where you are from in your kind of learning curve and what you're trying to learn. Right now, as I've kind of, and I do look at mindset stuff now and then, but a lot of stuff I try to read is more like tactical in nature. There's a book called Scaling Up that Vern Harsh
Yep.
wrote, and I think that it gives you some good direction and insights. I'm sure there's a lot of books I could think of, to be honest, but so.
No, I love it. All of those books. I think I've actually read or at least skimmed all of those books. Scaling Up and Think and Go Rich are like two of my favorites. But
yeah.
So I did read that you craft cocktails, I believe. Do you have a favorite craft cocktail, or is coffee more your pleasure? I know those are two different times of the day, but
sure, yeah. I mean, coffee is something I enjoy, but it's just like a functional drink for me. I'm not like inspired by it. But yeah, no, I've been really into primarily bourbon. So like, I collect wine and bourbon, but I've been collecting bourbon longer for about 10 years, and so. From that, I've learned to make different craft cocktails, classic ones. There's always the old fashioned, which is
sure.
People love, and just having that. As I've gotten older, I do less cocktails because there's sugar in them, and so I'm just like I'd rather not do that. And as I've gotten older, I also tended to go more towards the wine than the bourbon, because it's just the impact is different. So there's a time and a place for it. But yeah, no, I mean, I'd say just like the classic old fashioned is probably my go-to, but I also love, Sazeracs or mint juleps. And then if you step outside of that and you get into like gin, there's like the Martinez, which is like a great cocktail that's, I think not as well known. But there's a lot of stuff in that. And I've got a bunch of books on cocktails and things like that, and it's fun. People sometimes don't know that you might have a library of knowledge when it comes to that, and so when you surprise them, it's fun. But yeah, those are kind of the things. Right now I'm probably more on like a northern Italian wine, like from Piedmont kind of kick than anything else. So yeah.
I love it. In Portland, or I guess Oregon, Willamette Valley, some wonderful wine, Pinots, and
yeah. In fact, this picture behind me is a picture of the Willamette Valley, and it shows all the different topographical soils from the Missoula floods for the different wine areas in Oregon. So it's this huge, just map.
I love that. I didn't realize that. Thanks for that. Yeah, wonderful, just wonderful wines out there. Okay, before I give people an opportunity to learn about where they can find out more information about you, about your company, is there anything that I've not asked you on any topic that you might think our listeners or our viewers might want to know, whether it be about you, your company, or real estate in general?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't know if there's anything about me in particular. We covered a lot of ground when it comes to that. And I think my industry is probably pretty straightforward. But I think what for me is it's more of just reiterating the message of, real estate's a great industry. Do right by people and jump in and take action. You won't regret it. It can be scary, but, it will change your life. And it's definitely something that I think people should be involved with.
Definitely. Where can people learn more?
Yeah. So, our company, our core business is Sleep Sound Property Management. You can find us by just Googling our name or going to propertymanagementportlandor.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm always, happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. My name is Nicholas Cook. You should be able to see a picture of me if you search my name. And I like to post things, pretty much on LinkedIn that are exclusive to, real estate. So you'll see information there. But that's a great way to reach me. I'm on X and on Instagram, but mostly that's just for like X is probably more communicative than Instagram. I usually just post little videos I make, but there's a lot of ways to reach out, and happy to talk to anybody who wants to.
Definitely. Great. I appreciate that. I appreciate you investing some time with myself and with our audience, and for everyone else, we'll see you next time.
Cool. Appreciate it. Thanks, Mike.